Decorah is the person who guides us from the top of USAID in the Higher Education Solutions Network. And I'm going to ask Decorah to please inform the audience today of what we're up to as a network. Decorah Jones.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone. Oh, good. Everyone's awake. Great. We are on day 3 of what has been a really tremendous set of discussions around conflict and development. And again, just to introduce myself, my name is Decorah Jones. I'm the Program Director for the Higher Education Solutions Network and a Senior Advisor in the Office of Science and Technology at USAID. And so one thing I really want to highlight from yesterday, you all were here while I was in the building where we had this great time with your students who were in the Capstone Master's course. They came and they presented to a room full of people. We were very proud that we had both them presenting and great turnout for our very first student feature for the Higher Education Solutions Network. And so they gave their presentations. We had representation throughout the agency. They got some tough questions, but they did really well. And so I want you to be very proud of the students that you have, and I want you to thank you for having them make sure they come over and present to the agency. So that was really a success. And so what we have been attempting to do with the network since its official public launch in November of 2012 is put together a number of universities who are focused on science and technology for international development across a number of sectors in a number of regions. When we put out the call in February of 2012, we did not think we would get I thought. Other colleagues did not think we would get the 500 applications that we got that narrowed us, and then we subsequently narrowed to the 7 leading institutions who have 100 partners. But there is so much happening on campuses and with partners around the world. There's so much that people are doing that we as an agency weren't necessarily plugged into in partnership. We were plugged in around research. The CRISP programs were one way we were plugged in around research. We plug in around human and institutional capacity development through scholarship programs and actual institution building. We plug in through evaluation and through implementation, but we weren't necessarily able to execute a partnership relationship that allowed us to have conversations like this. And so we're very happy that we are now at the place where we have and are building new relationships with the academic community. And we're very happy that we have partners throughout the agency that are coming to the table and bringing their expertise. Thank you, Tim, for moderating this morning. We had Joe moderate on Tuesday, and then we also had Cynthia Brady, I was going to call her Cynthia Gill, but thank you, moderate on yesterday around natural resources and management. But we're so happy that we are able to put these relationships together. And in terms of the 7 leading institutions, each one of them is focused on a slightly different element of kind of the innovation ecosystem where people are creating new technologies and approaches, testing and evaluating these technologies and approaches, and scaling them in this much broader context of knowledge and data analysis that we bring to the table. And so from west to east, each one of those institutions is the University of California at Berkeley, Michigan State University, Texas A&M University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Funny, there was a little joke that I have about the Michigan Institute of Trucking, but that's not what they are. The College of William and Mary, Duke University, and Makerere University in Uganda. And so we're really happy about all the partnerships that we have, and we're very proud of the work that you all have done to take conflict and development forward. We're looking forward to the conversations that you have today and have had in these last 2 days, and the summations that come out of it that move your lab forward. So thank you, Ed, for your leadership. Thank you, colleagues from USAID, for your attendance and participation. Thank you, Michelle, for all of the work that you've done to put this together, to help put this together. Actually, can we give her a round of applause, please? She's been working very hard on this. You know, she handed me my folder on Monday night and said, "The students are your responsibility." I said, "Okay." So we made sure we took care of them. But enjoy the conversations today, and I will turn it back over to Ed to introduce the Science, Technology, and Food Security session for the day.
Thank you very much, Decorah, and thank you for telling everybody how great Michelle is. The rest of her team is Malcolm Phelps, and from the AFPAC Bureau, and Joe Hewitt, from CMM, from DACHA, CMM. Thanks a lot, Joe. they all give enormous guidance, tremendously good guidance to us. And that team, we hope we have you throughout the project, but I know you'll probably have some other assignments come along, but we really appreciate the way you've given us a really good start. I'd like to just mention as well that our team from Texas A&M are composed of 3 units: the School of Rural Public Health, and I believe we have Rasul Ramji representing the School of Rural Public Health. From the Bush School, we have a larger contingent today. Kishore Gawande on the panel. In fact, when you talked about the capstone students, those are his kids. He led that group in their studies. Each year, the Bush student body in their last semester is divided up into different groups to focus on different things. His particular group focused on conflict and development and have been a really great assistant to us in thinking about the issues. And some of the Bush School students here, stand up if you're here. But, well, there they are. Okay, thanks a lot for your contributions yesterday and today and throughout the conference. And now I'd like for my staff to stand up or at least raise their hands. I know Vince is busy back there, but Vince and Caitlin Shaw have had primary responsibility for the operations for this proceedings. Jerry Kinney, Megan Kinney, Shariar Kibria, Joey King have all made enormous contributions from our team putting this on. Audiovisual staff. You guys, I haven't really talked to you very much. You've been telling me what to do, but it's really cool. You've been a tremendous help to us, and thank you very, very much for the tremendous job you've done. Maybe they deserve a round of applause as well. The purpose of our workshop and of the C&D in general, I should say, is that we, through research, we want to assist the agency and other donors who are engaged in fragile, conflict-affected countries to improve programs and policies in order to avoid conflict, to support and to assist communities through conflict, and then for efficient, rapid recovery after conflict. Here today, you're helping us to define the kinds of issues that we should be looking at and the best places to study those issues. So today, our topic is science, technology, and food security. That's a wide range of topics. When we could have said science and technology for food security. We didn't do that. We want to talk about a range of technologies that may impact on conflict favorably or unfavorably. We can only represent a little bit of it by the people who speak, so you in the audience should as well think about science and technology and conflict and bring your ideas to the table. We're asking Tim Mahoney to lead the section. Thank you for introducing him to Cora. He returned to USAID to serve as the advisor on vulnerable populations in the new Bureau of Food Security. He served as the first head of the Poverty Reduction Office at USAID, which included 3 teams focused on microenterprise, urban development, and poverty analysis. So with that, Tim, I'd like for you to introduce your team.
All right, thank you very much.
Proceed.
Yeah, good. That is a photo of me. I usually have a Boston baseball cap on and sunglasses when I'm in the field, but Vicente wasn't sure. He said, "That's wait." Well, it's very good to be here, and I am from the Bureau of Food Security, and in that bureau, focus on vulnerable populations and a theme that I'm sure you're all hearing a lot about, resilience, which to me is in some ways the flip side of this vulnerability issue that I've focused on for much of my career at USAID and other places, and now I'm back doing the same thing. Let me go over the format of the session first, and then I'll introduce our presenters for this morning. This is my first time at the event, at the workshop, but I did hear the first couple of days went quite well. But I guess there might be a couple of other newbies here as well. So we do have 3 presenters, as you can see, and each will be given 10 minutes to give a brief overview of some of the themes they're involved in. I'll get an opportunity to add to that. And then following that, we'll sort of have a discussion, a conversation, I think. and certainly amongst ourselves, looking for those areas where we're seeking greater clarification, where we see some convergence, or where we see some divergence as well. But then bring all of you into that conversation as well. So the first presenter is Michael Collin. I'm going to introduce all three, and then we'll go down the line and they'll give their presentations. And Michael is a assistant professor of political science at UCLA. He did a postdoc at the Institute of Global Conflict and Cooperation, which I think quite relevant, obviously, for the themes of this workshop. His primary interests are development economics and political economy. And I guess in looking at the papers that people have presented and seeing the backgrounds of the other presenters, political economy is sort of really an important background to have for these discussions, and I can certainly understand why. His remarks today will focus on the potential of ICTs to improve governance. And a while back, I was calling that e-governance. I don't know, but I think some of the things you're talking about go beyond that. He's going to look at studies he's done in Afghanistan, Uganda, and Pakistan to point out some of the main themes that he sees in ICTs for strengthening governance. Our second speaker is George Vodovic, and George is a logistics and procurement specialist at the World Food Program. Previously, though, a member of the faculty member of the University of Belgrade in mechanical engineering. That was a while back. Since then, he's been, I think, to certainly all the continents and many countries working on World Food Program issues. His remarks today are going to focus on a really innovative program, Purchase for Progress, and in Afghanistan, where he is now stationed. I think that's really important. I don't know how many of you are following the food aid reform discussions, but I think sort of a precursor of some of those ideas is the Purchase for Progress program. And so I don't know if you've been following them here at all, but there's certainly a lot of debate now as to how we should reform our food aid programs. Last speaker is Kishon Gawande, also linked to UCLA, where he received his PhD in economics, okay? But now, as Edwin said, currently at Texas A&M at the Bush School of Government and Public Service. Vast interest, political economy again, and globalization, trade policy, determinants of conflict, finance for development, which kind of gets back to this issue of reforming our food aid program, perhaps. But today his paper is going to focus on two main questions. And the first of those questions is there a connection between trade and conflict? And can trade reduce conflict? So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our presenters. You do have 10 minutes each. I'll try to give you, you have 2 minutes remaining, and so to give you a little bit of sense of time. But we do want to keep the remarks brief so we make sure we get to everybody in the audience and the questions they might have.
Okay.
Michael.
Thanks to the organizers for having me here, and thanks for the introduction. Before I get started, I guess let me share a quote I came across recently that so all of my comments are going to focus essentially on governance or kind of reforms that have been initiated to try to improve governance. So I want to try to draw at least a little bit the link to conflict. So we've been working actually on a range of programs that try to use mobile money in order to improve mobile salary payments, I guess as a means of kind of improving salary payments within the government. I won't talk too much about that, but one immediate link to conflict. So we have a quote from the Taliban that said, "What do you think about mobile money?" Taliban said, "We love mobile money, we embrace it wholeheartedly, unless you're going to use it for government payments." So anything to strengthen governance is, at least their revealed preference, something that they're not interested in. So my research is all done, I guess my approach to research is always to use field experiments. And to me, a field experiment generally is going to have two phases. There's going to be sort of a design phase where you'll work either with people in civil society, people in government, maybe draw some ideas from economic theory to try to think about how can we set up something, a system that's going to use new innovations and new technologies to try to be effective. And that usually actually is a fairly long process. But the second stage, and this is part of all of my work as well, is it'll be evaluated using a randomized control trial. So this is just the exact analog of a laboratory trial. We'll use random assignments, treatments, and controls, and use that as a basis to establish a causal effect. So I'll share quickly results from 4 separate studies. All of the studies, I think, have kind of 2 themes that tie them together. The first is that they're going to try to use information technology to somehow mobilize information and alleviate information bottlenecks that are kind of the seedbed of governance failures. So all sorts of malfeasance, at least simple types of kind of low-level corruption, taking bribes for simple services, a lot of those you could imagine would be eliminated if we were to just mobilize information more effectively. The second theme is we try to develop these in such a way that they can really be sustainable and cost-effective with sort of minimum to no foreign involvement. And to me, that means we have to the bottom line is develop a product that's either useful for citizens or is useful for people in government, and something that is kind of incentive compatible or something that they really would like to use. It's a product that they'd be interested long after our experiment's over. So the 4 studies take place in Afghanistan, Uganda, and Pakistan. The first 2 were election monitoring experiments, and this was kind of the beginning of this agenda for me. The idea was a lot of election fraud happens during the aggregation process, and if you were able to use phones to get kind of a separate end-of-the-day count of votes, you could use this as a basis to try to compare with what you wind up after the aggregation process. If there are any changes, at least you have some basis to start to think about where changes might have been made. So we did this first in Afghanistan in 2010 during the parliamentary elections. We did that in the following February in Uganda. In both cases, we found sort of large and clear impacts using a randomized control trial that these things were reducing corruption. Again, you can see these 2 themes kind of clearly. First, a lot of corruption happens in a very spatially diffuse way. It happens kind of in the rural parts of Afghanistan. Now you can imagine with a little work, you can have visibility on what's going on everywhere, all at the same time. The second theme is we'd always had the idea that this could scale eventually to be something that's entirely citizen-based or entirely implemented by civil society. So again, this is something we hope is sustainable with not a lot of work. The second set of experiments take place in Pakistan, and these are both really happening with the government of Punjab. So I'd say these are kind of wholly owned by the government of Punjab and really are their initiatives. The first is we've called monitoring the monitors, and the idea here is the health monitoring system, so for rural clinics in Pakistan for a long time has been highly ineffective. So we went and performed a representative survey of rural clinics. We found that doctors were absent 67% of the time, and that these facilities, all of them are supposed to be visited by an inspector every single month. Only 22% of them had been. So what we did is instead of, the status quo had been the health inspector would go out with a simple paper form, fill out some data on attendance and medicine availability, cleanliness of facilities, and so on. These data were never used. They weren't useful to any senior policymakers who need them just for basic allocative decisions, where to send medicine, where to send doctors. So we just replaced those with a smartphone. We found that had a very large impact, so it more than doubled the rate of inspections, got it up to about 50%, which is half of where it's supposed to be by law, but represents a real improvement. And the final experiment I'll talk to you about today is the one I think, at least in this vein, that has the most promise. And again, this isn't something I developed, so I can't claim intellectual credit here, but it's called the citizen feedback model. And the way this works is for every basic service, so getting a driver's license, getting a basic outpatient service done at the hospital, registering property, et cetera, sort of every time you interface with the government for a simple transaction, they'll take down your cell phone number. And these people are then called back en masse and asked about, are you satisfied with the quality of services, and were you asked to pay for a bribe in order to receive the service? And I mean, this is still something that's proceeding in a sort of a iterative research and development fashion, but I think this is something where kind of prospectively there could have a lot of impact. So for me, working on this research has really kind of created two core takeaways. First, I think this is it's a simple idea. What does information technology do? You can gather a lot of spatially diffuse information that might be useful to someone like an auditor. I think that there's actually a lot of promise in that given the impacts that we've seen so far. The second takeaway for me, as someone who's kind of involved on the policy side, at least in trying to generate innovations that are useful for people, is that there really isn't going to be a sort of off-the-shelf solution. The development process has to be collaborative, and it has to be done with an eye to something that's actually generating a product that's useful for the end user. So you have to be sort of business-minded about these things. And so with that, I'll conclude.
Very good. Thank you. George.
My turn.
Yes.
Well,
Just for progress.
exactly. I work with the United Nations World Food Program, and I've been working with the UN for the last 20 years. So I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective from, okay, let's do it again. I work with the United Nations World Food Program for the last 20 years, and I'll give you a little bit more from the field point of view, because I worked in many countries dealing with countries where we had development operations, emergencies, and recovery operations. And today we are talking about here about something which is called Purchase for Progress, which is an innovative program for WFP where we are actually trying to look into other ways how to support local economies. And P4P was conceived originally as a project where WFP is going to use its purchasing power to promote access of smallholder organizations to the formal markets. And that came with a changing funding structure. You know that WFP is not funded by the budget of the United Nations. We live on donations. And most of the countries in the early days after the 1960s when WFP started were actually giving in-kind donations, meaning giving food to be distributed as food aid. And that changed substantially in, let's say, mid-90s when a number of countries started to give cash as cash contributions. And WFP actually saw an opportunity to buy food closer to the project area. So we moved from international, gradually buying in international markets, then looking down to regional markets, up to the level of country, local markets in the countries where there was an opportunity to buy in one part of the country for projects in the other parts. And then we actually realized that companies and sellers that we are working with are actually well-established companies, and there's a good reason for that, because WFP needs food to meet its obligation to beneficiaries and donors. So WFP actually decided to utilize certain percentage of money dedicated for local purchase in order to try to access smallholder farmers who otherwise cannot have access to formal markets. That was the original idea. Well, since then, it started, this idea was developed, let's say, in late 90s in Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And ever since then, from year 2005, actually, we started to have a pilot project to formalize this learning experience. And now we have P4P, Purchase for Progress, projects in 20 countries, which are stretching between development, countries with development portfolio, recovery operations, and I'm working in a country which is considered post-conflict. And actually in Afghanistan, currently we are looking into it as a pre-conflict because we don't know exactly what's going to happen and we are preparing ourselves. And that actually describes well what is happening in the sector of pre or post-conflict, because most of the countries are moving from one to the other depending on the development of the situation. Basically, P4P was originally conceived to work in countries where there are some systems in place. And we are talking about government extension services, banking services, standards, formal markets, etc., etc. However, you can appreciate that in a number of, let's say, post-conflict countries, these systems are not in place. And most of these it falls basically on organizations and international community to actually tackle most of the problems around across the value chain. And this is what basically we are doing in Afghanistan. it has to be emphasized that most of these activities in conflict or post-conflict countries are done in synergy or parallel to activities which are related to emergency operations or recovery operations. And we have a considerable challenge to basically put in peace these two, because the emergency operations and recovery operations are by nature oriented to short-term objectives which are giving very swift results and short coping strategies. And the problem is that it is mostly donor-driven. We in WFP, we have three basic types of operations. We are dealing with either emergency operation, something which is called PRO, which is protracted relief and recovery operation, and development operations, so country programs. Of course, country programs are implemented in countries where development is easy, which means that there are a number of government services which are already in place. And it's relatively simple in those areas to support farmers to integrate into formal markets because, in fact, these systems exist. However, in countries where the systems do not exist, we are driven by donors to actually implement certain operations which cannot mix development objectives within the same project. Like PRO cannot have development objectives inside of the project, otherwise it will not be funded. So it's really a challenge to actually work in one place which has most of the international community focused on certain aspects within their level of expertise. Every one of us is dealing with different subjects, but we are mostly oriented to certain activities related to emergency or recovery operations, and then to add to it a development component which has a mid-term or long-term objective. And this is what is actually happening now, where we have to review P4P project in order to fit into something that we consider might happen from 2014 to 2016 because of incoming elections and withdrawal of international security forces. Well, basically, what is it that we actually do in Afghanistan? P4P, Purchase for Progress, is by far wider in scope in Afghanistan than in any other place. And it's a commercially self-sustaining, comprehensive and well-integrated program, basically, rather than a project which is based around 4 pillars of activities. We're dealing with something which we call local procurement. And that is more than just a procurement. It's actually investing into working with small-scale farmers in order to bring up their capacity after post-harvest, to reduce post-harvest losses, dealing with commodity management. We are actually helping them to understand what are the formal ways of basically dealing with markets. And we are trying to link them with the processing sector. Then the second pillar of activity is fortification of food. We are working on large-scale fortification of wheat flour and oil, and that is also, that works towards nutritional objectives, because there is a high prevalence of malnutrition in Afghanistan as one of the major problems. And also help us to have a leverage by connecting farmers with potential market outside of WFP. Then we are working with food processing, meaning industry. We set up a couple of factories and supported commercial sector for production of high energy biscuits that we were using in our projects. And that helps us also to provide or work with different processors and producers to have a natural way to actually expand the market opportunities for them, as well as it works with the idea that we have working from the government point of view to establish standards. Maybe you know, but in Afghanistan there are no food standards. So there is no standard for wheat or wheat flour or oil, and that gives, from macroeconomy point of view, a lot of problem, because Afghanistan, which has a problem in agriculture sector, is working is actually importing most of the commodities from other countries where production is much higher. So there is a problem of competition from macroeconomic point of view. And finally, we are working with food quality and safety, which actually is helping us to deal with the government to put capacity at the government level for testing of food products and fortification, as well as working with the government on establishment of the food standards. So as you can see, we're actually working throughout the entire value chain. And basically, the best part of it is that our comparative advantage is that we are in the field. We are actually working with people. And we're working with every single segment of what I just described. And then that gives us an opportunity to engage with wider group of agencies and organizations, which help us actually to target other parts which are missing in the value chain. And basically, it gives us also a leverage to meet two different, let's say, approaches, which is top-down, working with government and institutions in establishment of standards and quality, and working from bottom-up, working with the field-level organizations in order to promote people to meet those standards. That is done in order to jumpstart the operation. It's clearly a case of taking a large risk in Afghanistan in order to implement such a project, from obviously emergency response or recovery response, which we always have in mind, because most of the organizations today and people in general are taking this risk avoidance approach rather than risk-taking or risk mitigation approach. And that is obviously driven by, again, by internal factors, but as external factors as well, which is donor-driven again. The idea in Afghanistan for P4P is that we have a positive commercial climate, which is driven by market forces, and that there are incentives in whatever we do rather than obligation to do something. And this is how the whole project is being developed. What I personally see as a challenge, basically, is that it is very difficult to match activities on emergency recovery approach with the medium-term development objectives. That's one. And obviously, donor approach in these cases should be slightly different. I think that it's indispensable from the donor point of view to actually look into possibilities to fund projects which are having development portfolio, because these medium-term objectives that we are pursuing in P4P are actually working as entry point to exit strategy. Most of the emergency operations, they have exit strategies which are related only to the project, but not to the situation. And in order to be able to tackle problems, long-term problems, there has to be some kind of entry point which is going to help us to put our feet inside of the door for further development. And obviously the funding which is given for these type of operations, which are separate from the mainstream operations, has to be given in whole. We cannot expect to start development operations and projects fearing that next year the funding is not going to be available, because that defeats the whole purpose of development project. Yes.
Thank you very much. Sure. Trade and conflict.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be part of this panel, because my portion is a bit more abstract, a bit more ground in theory, not so much ground in reality, but that's not yet. But my two colleagues over here on the panel are joining the dots, and that this is a great panel to be in. This white paper that I want to discuss revolves around these four questions about what specific investment or intervention should be made, what evidence exists to support the recommended investment or intervention, in what countries would the impact be greatest, and how will it reduce conflict? I'm thinking of trade and conflict in these lines. It's the first time that I've thought like this, and there is not much in the literature to guide us on trade and conflict. There is some cross-country studies, but cross-country studies are very, they're not the basis for policy, I don't think. Going back to first principles about trade, the answer to this question about whether there is a connection between trade and conflict, the answer is yes, and very strongly so, and it's been established in the literature in no uncertain terms. I'll go through two of these kind of concepts. Can trade reduce conflict? Trade can exacerbate conflict and reduce it. So it's all about the kind of trade, who has the property rights over, who's going to be the gainer and who's going to be the loser from trade. You know, in trade theory, people assume that all these problems are solved. But once you get on the ground, as we've heard from my two colleagues here, it's much more difficult. The micro situation on the ground is very different. One of the theories that can guide us is this theory that greed motivates trade, motivates conflict. So a rational theory of conflict is that as long as war is more lucrative than peace, the proponents of war will continue it. There is this in political science and in economics a big debate going on between greed and grievance, but really they are very, very strongly interrelated. They're not very different concepts. But let's formulate this idea and kind of push it, because it's got a very sound basis, especially in countries like DRC, dictatorships, repressive regimes. So the question that I want to think about is a reformulation of this, right? So will the elite or the junta or the dictator reduce the repression if it is confident of remaining in power with lesser repression? It's a very simple question, and I think trade can answer this, because the answer to this, I think, is yes. Can trade achieve this situation where repression becomes less costly? Yes, if people are better off than under extreme repression. And can this be achieved? This is a tough question for which there are no answers. There are field experiments. There's a lot of work going on in order to answer questions like this, and perhaps the answers will come out. What my capstone group, which we mentioned, has this proposal in Burma. Burma is a good case in point to think about an intervention on these lines. So my capstone group wants to implement two very ambitious things, and it's a 3-4 year long project. It's in the first year it's going to be pretty much scoping things out. I'm really happy to hear about the ICT and the P4P, because they really connect the dots over here for us in the concept stage. So the Burma case attempts to reverse the greed idea through a two-pronged strategy. And Burma is somewhat opening up. They are open to land laws. There have been some rumbles about new land laws happening in Burma. And the proposal from our capstone group is to have an experiment where there are 3 regions. This is not formal randomized controlled trial, but there is a heterogeneity among regions where there is conflict, where there is no conflict, where there is ethnic heterogeneity in these regions, where you're simultaneously experimenting with giving people the rights over the land through land law certification, and a strategy of advising them on scientifically increasing their productivity, which at Texas A&M, since we are the Aggies, we know how to do that, and we have demonstrated capacity in that. The particular product may not be very interesting to people around the room, but it's rice. It's an important product. Now, rice prices are depressed if you look at, if you really push trade theory, and you're saying, okay, if you want to specialize in rice, the rice price is not going to increase the income of people. Let's take it one step at a time. Rice production is demonstrated in Burma because it's got the potential to produce it. So at this initial stage, it's about building capacity. If you can have property rights and be able to produce rice and let the farmers decide what else to diversify into, I think that's the endogenous correct way to do it, rather than impose a cash crop on individual farmers. So it's about creating capacity in the first 2 or 3 years, and then since the farmers have property rights, let them do the process of price discovery. Let them decide what to do and where to take this. The point is to have the farmers active in a market setting, and really that's the micro motivation for this kind of concept. The second broad theory is which is very well known. I don't have to describe it in great detail. Is the resource curse, and the resource curse, which applies to most countries that have poor governance and are rich in resources, is that the government, which has the machinery of the state, the army, the police, and has captured the machinery of the state, also captures the resources. And they're both self-feeding. That's the tight equilibrium. One reinforces the other, and it's repressive. And these are not distributed, because distributing these things is a sign of weakness. It's probably not the case that the government wants to be so repressive, but they're not knowing what other forces can be unleashed by not being repressive. It is forced to do that, and it has the wherewithal to do it. The DRC is rich in mineral resources, but if you're familiar with the history of the DRC and the political economy of how who comes to power distributes the power and has their and establishes their political rights over land, over mineral resources, over mining contracts, it is a resource curse state. The second. How do you reverse something like this? And this is the other proposal from my capstone group, which is to go back to a demonstrated capacity of production of a crop, especially in the east part of the DRC, which is the Kivu region, which is the most difficult region in DRC for the central government to control. Kinshasa has very little control over the Kivu region, which has a lot of influence from neighboring countries, particularly Rwanda. Both countries are exhausted by war. This has been going on for a long time. This is the right time for an intervention. Rwanda has somewhat stabilized. Borlaug has demonstrated capacity of working with Rwandan authorities on the production of coffee, and that's the particular product. And the North Kivu region has areas which have the demonstrated capacity of producing coffee. Now it's really hard for George will put me right on what's actually happening on the ground. Even if you could grow coffee, how do you know that plantation owners, who are big landowners anyway, won't take away all the rents? How do you know that plantation owners are the only way to grow coffee? Because they can bribe the government, and then they can, enter the P4P chain or some kind of a supply chain that transports it out. We don't know the answers to these questions, and the literature doesn't provide any either. But it's quite possible to make a pact with the government because of the region, which Kinshasa always thinks is moving away from us, and there is a lot of insecurity about the region, is to demonstrate the ability for small farmers to be able to get some rents, even if it's plantation crop, and even if it's a plantation owner that's producing coffee, if there is a possibility of these rents going to increase the income of small-holding farmers. Maybe a cooperative is an alternative to plantations. I mean, the first year or the first 2 years will be an exploratory phase where there will be some experimentation with who owns the land. The land is de facto owned by the locals. the central government de jure is the owner of the land, but that's not the truth on the ground in Kivu. There have been experiments where a couple of British NGOs have demonstrated the possibility of producing coffee and exporting it to markets. They haven't demonstrated the capacity quite yet of having increased the income of people in the Kivu region. That's what our proposal is about. I think I'll stop there and maybe in the discussion section.
Good. Thank you very much. You're right on time, actually. I kind of slipped in keeping you to your 10 minutes. Or I was late in putting my fingers up for 2 more minutes. So good for you. All right. I mean, we've heard some very, very interesting presentations here. And I'm going to try to, in my initial comments, link them into where the Feed the Future program is going in USAID. Now, I'm going to assume most of you have some knowledge of that program. It's our big food security program. And perhaps if you don't, questions are a way to clarify it. But I want to link what we're doing there to the very interesting presentations that we heard from our 3 panelists here. You know, Feed the Future is a program to help countries address food insecurity of oftentimes large portions of their population. Our investments most often are focused on those high potential areas where you have access to technologies, you have access to markets, you have good soils, so that the investments in improving the productivity are going to pay off fairly quickly. I don't usually work in those areas. I work in what I will call less favored areas. And these areas oftentimes are chronically food insecure and are challenged, I guess, in terms of how they can participate in a broader effort to promote agricultural intensification in these countries. I bring that up because I think there's oftentimes a very interesting overlap between these less favored areas, these resilient deficit areas, and conflict. And so I'll talk a little bit about the drivers of that, but I think it's very important that the events in 2011, 2012 really made us rethink how we were moving forward with our Feed the Future program. What were those events? The crisis in the Horn of Africa, the crisis in the Sahel. And these crises were occurring in areas that really weren't a focus, at least, of our food security programs. And so our response was, well, we have this fairly large Feed the Future program to support food security, but it's not really going to do much about the situations that we're seeing in the arid and semi-arid regions of sub-Saharan Africa. I think I use the term less favored areas, you know, and there are obvious reasons. I said semi-arid or arid regions, so they don't have the rainfall of some of these other areas. But there are other things. I mean, these same areas have suffered from decades of neglect. You know, governments have decided to, well, you know, building roads there or investing in technologies, agricultural technologies that can benefit these areas. We're not going to get the payoffs that we can by looking at these more high potential areas. So schools, roads, health clinics, basic governance is oftentimes a major challenge in these same areas. And I guess I see the broader theme of this workshop, conflict and development, being very similar to what we're doing in these areas. In the past, we have focused on humanitarian assistance, and it was to help these people survive. And I'm struck by your comment, George, on the challenges you face, emergency and recovery, but not on development. And we have said, well, wait, you know, we think there are development potentials in these areas. We have to take a time perspective that's a little bit longer than 8, 10, or 12 months in order to develop that potential. And we have to provide, I'll use this general term, humanitarian assistance, in a way that it provides an entry for broader sorts of transformations to occur. You know, if I look at the drivers of the challenges faced in these areas, you know, they're multiple. And I've begun to list some of them already. The natural environment, of course, is primary. Population growth, though, as well. And the consequence on the increased pressure on the natural resource base. But usually these problems come together with a governance theme. And I'll call it state incorporation. There are lots of ways to look at these issues, I think. But oftentimes, customary institutions are being challenged to address issues that they have, for many generations, been fairly effective in addressing. And in part, they're being challenged because of these multiple stressors I just mentioned, but also in part, you have national, subnational, local governments coming in and saying, well, these are now our responsibilities. Rangeland management, for instance, that tribes in Somalia, in northern Kenya, in Ethiopia, had fairly sound mechanisms for you know, resolving issues over rangeland management. But with the increased presence of a national government, the authority of these institutions begins to wane. And so what in the past could have been a conflict that was resolved, not always quickly and not always peacefully, at least in immediate sense, but could have been resolved, now has a tendency to begin to continue on and exacerbate the sort of other drivers that I talked about earlier. So I think the issue we're bringing up in Burma with land, and actually I guess in the DRC as well, you know, it's a very interesting way to approach this, because although land tenure in a pastoral society quite a bit different than land tenure in a agriculture society, farming society, crop system society, quite different, but the drivers of the sources of conflict in those communities, I think, quite the same. I don't think it's just an issue of land. We didn't talk much about water. Maybe you did more yesterday. But I have this favorite quote, you know, that comes from Colorado, actually. But having worked in areas where water was a problem, it seems it's not just unique to Colorado. And that is that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. You know, so the natural resources do really provide an important source of conflict. And if you don't have a governance system in place that can help address the sources of those conflicts and resolve those conflicts, then I think you're really in for an enormous challenge. The sort of core concepts that are a part of the Feed the Future program more generally that I think are quite relevant for the discussions here are related really to value chains. And George H. talked a lot about their efforts to establish value chains in Afghanistan and some of the challenges faced with that. But underlying, I think, our efforts in Feed the Future to work with value chains in those high potential areas, but also to work with farmers and value chains in these resilient deficit areas, these less favored areas, is the concept of trust. And you know, it's a word I think we have to use a little bit more in this conversation. And you know, without that trust, I mean, I could go through so many different examples of how just obvious opportunities to improve your well-being, to take advantage of new markets, are forsaken because you don't have trust with the individuals and organizations that you'll be working with. I should do a better job of keeping my own, sorry about that. All right, I'll move ahead quickly then. So I think trust is very important. I think also a more effective state, and I said at the outset, political economy. You know, one of the things a more effective state has to do, it seems, is make commerce possible. In recent visits, you know, a year ago to parts of northern Kenya that were being struck by this drought, a lot of the markets there were very, very unsafe. And that was because that people had lost cattle, were trying to recapture cattle, and cattle rustling is one way to go about it. So there were real problems with that. So, you know, making commerce possible, I think, is really, really important. I think in that process, though, we have to realize elite capture is certainly a problem that we have to address. Just having commerce taking place isn't enough for the sorts of transformational changes that we think are important. And this gets back to the sorts of issues Michael was talking about related to governance, representative governance systems that provide a more level playing field, I suppose, for everybody else. And provide really a platform for what I'll call inclusive growth. Not just an expanding market, but an expanding market that allows the smallholders, that allows the more vulnerable households in these communities to participate in those new opportunities. All right, so with that, I'll close my opening remarks. Then I'll let panelists here, if you have questions of each other, comments you'd like to make, whether they be asking for clarifications or highlighting some certain things that were brought up. Michael or Georgia, you've got a question already? Yeah.
Actually, what was just mentioned now was about commerce. And it's really interesting to see in Afghanistan is actually there is a lot of commerce going on. I mean, seriously a lot of commerce, because most of the commodities which are being used in Afghanistan are coming from outside. And this is exactly what is undermining local production of wheat and other agricultural products, because definitely they are not competitive at this stage. So how I see it is that basically the lobby which is influencing the government not having standards and not having systems to protect its own production is stronger than the other one, which is looking into the sources of products from inside. And that gives us a problem. So how to establish the commerce is really an interesting question, which I don't have an answer. But I have another example in DRC. I started a project, P4P project in DRC in area of near to the lake Tanganyika. And basically what we've noticed was that due to lack of commerce and access, there was a granary around Kalemi, which was having a surplus of about 60,000 tons per year. And when we went there, we couldn't find 300 tons to buy ourselves. That is only because basically there was no possibility for these people to actually go somewhere and actually sell their the maize that they were producing. And what we actually invested in was not only organizing producers, but also creating transportation capability and inviting traders from big cities, which are like down south, some 1,000 kilometers down south, like 10 million city or 6 million city, which was the natural market before. And we were re-establishing these commercial links in order to promote production. And that works to some extent.
Very interesting.
To add to that, just like the United States is a big market from which China has prospered, in Africa, the big market is South Africa. I mean, there are markets in Europe and there are supply chains that can take the coffee, et cetera, to Starbucks, but the big market, the gravity is in South Africa. And DRC is a part of this, not the customs union, but it's already got, it's a part of AGOA. It's got the institutional connections to these countries. Who's going to make these investments, the infrastructure, the supply chain built into South Africa is a question with a very big payoff if you can answer it properly. Obviously, DRC is not going to make these investments. Obviously, the central government is not interested as much in the development of the South Kivu region. They are going to have to figure out themselves how to port their grain to the market, and they're too poor to do it by themselves. This is where international agencies have a big role. This is where customs union or the AGOA institutional structure can play a big role. And it's playing exactly the opposite. They're penalizing DRC for doing this and that, human rights, and not allowing the trade to occur. But I think USAID has a big role to play in this kind of structure.
Good, good. Can I just keep with this theme for 1 minute? Michael, it looks like you have a question, but I did put the concept of trust on the table. And when you're talking about value chain governance and you're talking about a rice farmer or a coffee grower connecting to these larger markets, there's lots of links there that aren't in place for some obvious reasons, I suppose. And, lack of physical infrastructure is certainly a part of it. But I think there's some social institutions that are missing as well. And I guess if I were to ask about the value chain governance that you see in Afghanistan, for instance, Georgia, how would you characterize it? And to what extent do farmers, smallholders, feel like they'll get a fair shake if they begin engaging in that market?
Well, first of all, the question is whether there is a market and which type of market there is. And I'm from a country which is meeting East and West, and I have a lot of appreciation for basically commerce being done in that part of the world. We always frequently neglect that these people survived all changes. They survived Taliban's and before Taliban's and British and now the modern economy, and they're trading. They're doing things in a different way. They are doing it on trust, and they are doing it without standards based on something which, where the stakes are by far higher than any one of us can possibly imagine. They put their families and their own necks out when they are doing business. And this has to be really appreciated. So basically, trade exists. The difference is that if we want to put it in a way that's accessible to organizations, we need to actually show them what does it mean civil service procurement standard, or if we are doing, WFP is now engaging with partners to put a strategic range reserve there, which should have some kind of mechanism of replenishment in and out. And that is going inevitably to look into the ways how these people are going to be trading with the government. That is the point. The trade exists, and it's done on trust. And basically, what doesn't exist is how to actually find a way to reflect this in something that we consider as a commerce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another comment?
I had a question for Michael,
please.
if I could ask. One possibility, and this is a breakfast conversation with Behzad Ruzi at USAID, who's doing a lot of work in Afghanistan, is supposing you have a situation like Afghanistan where they don't like anything to do with the central government, And there is a pact to be made with the central government in the sense that we want the tribes and the provinces to be completely decentralized. And the pact, the kind of a pact is that, okay, you leave us alone in the sense that let us do what we want to do. We'll do the trade. We'll discover our comparative advantage. You provide the infrastructure, etc. But we will pay a tax. So the government agrees that, okay, whatever transaction you do, you pay me a tax. Okay? Because that's what's going to fund the big central public services like infrastructure. And the big ICT thing in this is like how this can be done truthfully, right? Like there is a trade, it has to be truthfully reported, and a tax is paid immediately, if it's possible.
I mean, so I suppose there's kind of a very kind of deep political economy question and a small technical question in that. I mean, yeah, it's a tremendously deep political economy question. I think that there probably are economies to scale to increasing kind of the space that the central government occupies. And so I don't know if kind of the right solution for Afghanistan is going to be this kind of patchwork of patronage or not. But the technical question is, yeah, I mean, I think that monitoring tax receipts using ICT is probably a possibility. I think, so there's some experiments going on now in Pakistan and Punjab where they try to incentivize tax collection by giving tax farmers kind of different incentives and different degrees of residual claim to the taxes they raise. And if anyone who knows anything about Pakistan, no one pays taxes at all. And so they've had some success there, but part of the success has been because they've had to institute much heavier monitoring of the bureaucrats involved in tax receipts. So I do think that there's kind of an innovation there.
The political economy question gets solved because the provinces want to pay the tax because then the central government is off their backs. That's the pact here.
Right.
So
yeah. No, that makes sense to me. But I mean, so I think all of this shares one bit of fundamental relation. So this issue of trust that you raised, Tim, is, I think that a lot of what we're discussing here are kind of different, clear technical interventions that we know kind of in a vacuum definitely have high returns, right? So value change development definitely is something that we know works, and we know that there's kind of, we probably scratch our heads as to why it is that smallholder farmers or micro entrepreneurs aren't interested in such a thing. And I guess as you guys develop the research agenda as part of this conflict and governance group, I would really encourage you to push in that direction. Is kind of what is it about conflict in particular, and what is it about kind of the nature of governance in conflict-affected societies that make it such that these kind of very clear high return innovations aren't appealing at all to people who would benefit from the growth that they could produce. And I think that there's kind of again and again, there are examples of kind of that sort of thing falling, not being adopted. So.
Very good, very good. Other, yeah, I just wanted to see. All right, here we are, yes.
I have a couple of questions. Mike mentioned about experiments. So my question is that one of the main goals of HESN is data-driven technology and collecting data. So I just wanted to ask the question that do you think, in terms of observational data and experimental data, the new wave of research considers and examines experimental data? Do you think that approach can provide us with new knowledge and information? My second question is, Kishore talked about trade and development. So to enhance trade and development in these developing conflict-prone nations, what kind of food security aid or agricultural development aid should be pursued? We heard about PL 480 programs, we heard about Purchase for Progress, and humanitarian assistance. So what kind of programs do you think, or what kind of designs do you think would be the most appropriate to enhance trade and development?
Should we take a few, or how would you like to do it? Okay, good. Other questions?
My question is, Russell from A&M School of Rural Public Health. On the P4P program, you said that there was a lot of vibrancy in trade happening in Kabul, and a lot of food is being imported into Kabul, and therefore the local produce cannot compete with the imported product. So, and then there is also one of your pillars which said was food fortification. So how does in practical terms, how does the food fortification take place when food is imported? Or is it the imported food that is fortified? Is the local food? And how do you determine what fortification? There's such a lot of malnutrition existing in Afghanistan, Pakistan, across all the way to India, and stunting and so on. So that's one of the key elements in my mind to kind of address population health. And one comment I wanted to make was, in terms of, I come from a coffee farming family in Kenya. Kenya has something known as the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, KPCU, where the farmers would give in their coffee. They're legally only allowed to sell to KPCU, the Kenya Planters Cooperative Union, which would buy coffee from the farmers. And of course, there's leakage on the other side, so there are scavengers who want to come and pay high prices. But in general, in overall, there's a standardized way of marketing the product. So something like that can be emulated. And then, of course, there's a KPSU keeps its commission and so on. The usual standard ways of everybody retaining a portion of the profit. So that's one model that could be, I'm sure you must have looked into it, but I thought I'd just remind you of that. Thanks.
I'll just stay on this side for a minute. Any other questions from over here? Should we start with some answers to these questions, and then other people can, yeah.
So
who wants to start? Yeah.
So on the first question on experiments versus non-experimental data, I mean, I think they clearly both have a role, but for those who are going to be involved in the academic part of this agenda, I would say there's kind of the scope of what can be brought into an experiment is actually expanding very, very rapidly. I mean, I think it's a very, very exciting time to be working as an experimental researcher, in the sense that there's an unprecedented level of interest from both kind of international actors and especially kind of national governments for trying to understand these deep issues. And for some things, they really would love to know kind of why are there basic adoption issues? Why is there a basic resistance to adopting new high-yield varieties or whatever? And so I think they surely both have a role, but in selecting between the two, I would say try to go with an experiment first, and there's probably more to be done now than kind of ever before.
Michael asked a very, very interesting question. Let me paraphrase it. So we're not doing enough to study or in the academic sense. We're not, when we are making these proposals, to shed light on why those interventions that have huge potential impact actually don't ever take place. This is a very, very important question, and through the resource curse and greed, I was trying to indirectly answer this question, but again, answers to this question break the logjam. If you can actually break this, then it's a watershed event. We understand that it's a big deal, and that's the point of trade. If you ask me what is it about trade that is, take the question of India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan don't trade with each other. The potential for trade between these countries is huge. And the only interaction between these two countries happens at the top political level, which has very little connection with the individual. If you open trade between these two countries, just like has happened with India and China, then you have individuals interacting with each other. The whole political economy landscape changes. If I have something to lose from a breaking of relations between the two countries, I have my lobby to tell my government, don't do this. That's the most powerful political economy force on a government to kind of cool it. And this happened. This is a bargain that is struck between the two countries. So these two countries have figured out, or at least Pakistan has figured out, how to not have individual interactions. It's the same with many of these countries. What's happening in DRC that's a little different is that it's the people in power are making these political bargains and sharing power with provincial people. So now the bargain is not with the central government, but with an agency which has some control at the center, which also represents the Kivu region. So trust building, or however you want to phrase it. But that's the point of what trade can do. It's a partial answer to Shahriar's question, the coffee part, where you the trade benefits the individual. It's kind of backward. You're trying to work backwards. How do you make it benefit the smallholder rather than the plantation owner, rather than even the co-ops in DRC? What happens is, supposing I'm a plantation owner, I'm a small farmer. I pay to the co-op. The co-op has a bargaining ability. They're going to rip me, and they do it because they have to pay the government. But now you have a regional interest over there, and you don't have to go to the central, Kinshasa. You have like a agricultural office over here, much like in Rwanda, where the interaction of the co-op happens with the government agency in the region, which has more of a regional stake. I think there is the possibility of an individual, making much more than used to be the case earlier. But this is the big question about why these interventions haven't worked so far.
Do we answer? There was one question.
There was about,
yes. Are you going to pick that one up?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And that's a good example as well. Well, food fortification, especially flour fortification, for example, there is really a problem. I mean, when you look the production, national production, the installed capacities of the mills, of roller mills, where the fortification, industrial fortification can be done easily because of the technological process, it's about 45,000 tons per month. And the mills are producing about 2.5, which is about, let's say, 5%. So this 5%, we are fortifying all 5%, meaning we are fortifying, in other words, beauty of statistics, 100% of industrial products, okay, which are going to commercial sale. And that's only 5% of the capacity. And that is because of macroeconomy, because it's cheaper and feasible to import from Kazakhstan, Pakistan, and other countries where there are subsidies for production of wheat flour. There is a ring of the mills in Pakistan, which is actually producing wheat flour orientated for sale in Afghanistan, and basically wheat flour is exactly the same price, or even cheaper than wheat in Pakistan because of the subsidies. So to deal with this, there has to be some kind of other activities, which is the reason why we are working on standards, because having standards is going to be able to, when it is consensus reached and there is a political will to actually implement and a capacity to basically enforce. This is why we are not only working on fortification of wheat flour inside of Afghanistan, but we are also working on the standard side and on the government capacity to basically have labs to be able to enforce those standards. It's a long-term strategy. Again, we are talking about mixture of recovery operations and the emergency operation compared to what needs to be done. And that answers the question about which type of programs are there to support trade. Trade doesn't come just by itself. There are a number of things which are happening in and all the countries are different. Every one of them is absolutely different, and we need to look individually in every one of them. We cannot neglect that there is a need for food aid as such, as in all traditional terms where we are delivering food in order to stop people dying, and that's going to continue. But at the same time, there has to be a link, so the donor community and the systems have to be in place to support that. And in parallel or along with that, there has to be a system where people recognize that there has to be some other activities which are funded, which are going in synergy, but having a longer term objectives and yielding results in time, not in a short period of time like 3 or 5 years, which is the case in emergency or recovery operations. Well, it is also important, just as a curiosity, when we are working with this flour fortification, olive fortification, we are working with partner GAIN. And their work is oriented to the commodities which are being imported. So WFP is working on fortification of commodities produced in Afghanistan. And they're trying to reach producers of, for example, wheat flour or oil, because there are very few which are serving Afghanistan market, in order to kind of facilitate the process of fortification there, so that things which are coming inside of Afghanistan are fortified in support of nutrition efforts. Now, this is entirely open to companies' goodwill, because if there are no standards and no capacity to check at the border crossing, it's a big question whether these certificates which are produced just for the export actually have any meaning. But it's a self-perpetuating question, where we have to work. An obvious answer for me is that we have to actually, in every country, look into what is missing in the value chain and tackle exactly that. Even though we, agencies, are not working on all these aspects, there has to be some kind of a mechanism to sit together and look into target these questions. And my modest opinion is that I don't think that things work if they're not put in practice. So whatever is the capacity building or capacity creation which is not used is going to be lost, like a language which the person doesn't speak. So unless we actually do things in the field, and what we are trying to do in Afghanistan, we are practically working on one side in order to support the other side, and vice versa. Unless it is really put in place throughout the value chain, is going to break down. Like cold storage, which is produced, but people did not look into how to trade with these products which are supposed to be in the cold storage.
Thank you. Very good. All right. Start here. Yes.
Armin Linear with USAID. But I wanted to tell a story about commerce and how it is dramatically changing if you're not familiar with it. And many of us may not be, because we don't work in business much. But my son has a business. He's a real small business. And the world has changed, and it's changed overnight. My son is buying direct from China. Direct from China, from manufacturers. So it's not just traders or not just wholesalers that are doing the big purchases. No, it's expanded. It's my son buying from China direct. And when he buys, he's not just buying. No, he's talking to the person. He's seeing the person on Skype, right? He's chatting with them online. And he's not just talking about what he's buying. He's talking about other stuff. I'm watching him, right? He's talking politics, he's talking religion, he's talking a lot of things with this person as he's buying. And he's talking investment. Oh, maybe you'd like to invest with us. So he's not only linked, and you mentioned lobby, yeah, he's now got, his business is connected to China. And so, you know, things might close that down. He's very interested, and he'll email his congressman, as you mentioned. So anyway, that has really, really changed. Also, the trading, the shipping costs have just dropped to a fraction. China's sending stuff by the mail, and it's just for pennies from mainland China to our house. I mean, it's, and the other shipping industries have changed so that the shipping costs are going everywhere. So the other example I wanted to give you is in Iraq even. The Small Business Administration, they were buying from China, and they were going to go fly to China because transportation costs have dropped so much. Now, I don't think you had to fly. You can do Skype, and you can use PayPal to pay these people. But he was actually flying to China to go visit the supplier because he wanted to establish that relationship. You know, that's the Arab way. You know, it's a trust way. So things have changed dramatically, and this is all probably in the last, you know, year and a half, something like that. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go. Yes. You've already got your microphone there. Very good. You guys are ahead of me.
Paul Summers from California State University at Fresno. Just have maybe an observation and maybe a suggestion. The group has talked about the role of value chains in conflict environments, some issues and opportunities of value chains in conflict environments. And then Tim, you talked about Feed the Future, which as we all know now, promotes agriculture value chains as a main strategy or a driver for food security, okay? But as far as I know, Feed the Future does not have any indicators that look at if or how Feed the Future type projects impact conflict. That's not, I don't think that's one of your indicators, is it? So perhaps, Ed, maybe under the the conflict and development initiative here, perhaps you folks can start to look at some of these current investments through a conflict lens, so that we understand these investments that we have now, and several of them are in conflict countries. Mali is one of the Feed the Future countries. So perhaps we can go kind of down the list and look at those countries that are in conflict that are also Feed the Future countries, and just look at it through, as I say, through a conflict lens. You know, how are these Feed the Future investments reducing, or perhaps maybe feeding conflict, local conflicts? That's my suggestion.
Yes.
Chris Payne, also USAID. Georgia, I had a question about WFP efforts in Afghanistan, and that was, what do you think are the kind of long-term sustainable interventions that you've had in the last 10 years or so, especially on the capacity building side, maybe the marketing side, and is there a role for some of the mobile technologies that Michael addressed?
Hi, I'm Steve Hagblade from Michigan State University. I have 3 quick observations on the subject of Burma. I gather that's a potential country of interest to you. And if so, 3 comments, kind of linking comments from the panel. First is that MSU's just completed an ag sector diagnostic of Burma. We spent about 6 months there, and that's just released formally yesterday. And so I can make that available to you. There's a lot of material in there that I think will help you. Basically, you're going into a place where they've done about as much wrong as it's possible to do. Actively suppressed farmer decision-making, control land, told you have to grow cotton, you have to grow maize, and you have to grow cowpeas. Controlled the markets, decimated the ag extension system, chronically underinvested in research, illegal for more than 5 people to even gather. You have no farmer organizations, very different. These P4P programs that hinge on farmer organizations, you don't have a lot of the organizational infrastructure that you have elsewhere. So the Minister of Agriculture summarizes the situation by saying we need A to Z. And that's really right. They really have, it's almost tabula rasa there. Now, out of the A to Z list, you've picked 2 items, the land tenure and the ag technology. My second comment, I would issue a cautionary note on the land tenure one and an encouraging note on the kind of things that Michael's talking about. The land tenure is the single biggest bone of contention in Burma. 50% of the rural population is landless. 50%, worse than Bangladesh, worse than any place I'm aware of. It's a huge issue, compounded by the military's allocation of tens of thousands of hectares to generals, wives of generals, Chinese companies who are partnered with sons of generals. So, Kishore, you're a brave man, and I hope that Texas A&M has a very generous life insurance and benefits package, because you're going to need it if you're not careful about how you go into the land issue. I think there's some things you can do, but I would urge a side conversation here, because we sat down with human rights lawyers. The oppressed are jailed there. Farmers whose land is taken away and then who have the nerve to protest in court are in jail, and their wives are thrown in jail, and their kids are thrown in jail. And this tiny little Burmese lawyer who is pro bono litigating these cases for the dispossessed farmers broke down at the end of our session, and he said, the countryside will go up in flames if they don't resolve the land issue. I think that's the single most dangerous issue in Burma. If anything brings down the regime, it's going to be the land issue. So Texas A&M probably doesn't want to be in the business of bringing down a government, so you're going to have to tread very cautiously as you venture into that land arena. However, last suggestion is the kind of things that Michael's talking about. When you look at this A to Z list, we laid out some priority prescriptions in this diagnostic report, and probably the most important, easiest transformational investments are going to be in the ICT area. They have almost no mobile phone coverage in rural areas. It's a seditious thing to do because then farmers could communicate and collaborate, and we all know what that leads to. But it's in a system where they have really a non-functional ag extension system. You want to raise productivity. Well, the only way you're probably going to do it in that circumstance is you get some smartphones out so farmers can go and take a picture of this leaf hopper and fax it back to, beam it back to Yazin University, and they can do the diagnostics remotely. I think there's some enormous powers both on the marketing side and on the production side. So ICT is an area where I think you could move very quickly, and you could solve A through H, probably, of these problems with the ICT intervention. So bottom line is I think a lot about the ICT, and think very, very carefully about the whole land issue.
We've only got about 10 minutes left, so Joe, is there another question over here, quick one? And then I'm going to let these guys respond to the many, many interesting points that have been made.
Out all the time to actually respond. Let me see if I can get this out quickly. My question is really to Michael about the work you're doing. I just find this stuff fascinating, really fascinating, and I'll preface my remark with, I wish I were more familiar with your research, and so maybe you've thought about the question that I have here, and maybe if I were more familiar, I would have answered it myself by having read stuff. But here's what I'm thinking. If I understand the premise of the research, that ICT can, in a sense, shine a light of information on government activities in a way that will incentivize among government people better effectiveness, more legitimacy, less corruption, because in a sense what shining that light of information on government does is it incentivizes people to put pressure for better service and more effectiveness and more legitimacy. That's, I think, the premise of the whole thing. And it got me thinking, and I have to admit this is just preliminary thinking, surprisingly all the way back to my graduate student days, about a book that I read, we all read, good political scientists that we are, Anthony Downs' book, An Economic Theory of Democracy, where he develops this idea that citizens and voters are rationally ignorant, that they essentially just try to pick out just the bare minimum of information in order to make choices about candidates and packages of policies that they think they'll get. That people don't really try to soak themselves with maximum amounts of information, they just try to get the bare minimum. And the term he coined was that citizens were rationally ignorant about that. If that's true, it suggests that in these settings where we set up systems, ICT systems that set up enormous amounts of information that people could tap into, the people will not tap into it. They won't immerse themselves in that information. They'll only sort of dip in a little bit because people are busy and they don't want to spend all their time grabbing this information to learn everything they can. And that leads me to the question, what are the limits of these technologies? If it's true that people, in a sense, will perhaps minimize how much they want to engage this information, what are the limits of the potential for ICT in driving some of the benefits that you've started to demonstrate already with your research?
Very good. All right, so we'll start with that. Maybe, Michael, you can answer that question. But then there were other very, very interesting questions raised as well. Pick up one or two of those, and then I'll let George and Kishore deal with them as well.
So this is a great question. So what are the limits to what can be achieved with this? I actually, I think that kind of deep political change is probably not something that this is capable of achieving. I would say, I think that, so take the simple example of election monitoring. I think what we've done is probably created a comprehensive way to eliminate cheating during the aggregation process. So if that were to work as it's supposed to, votes that wind up in the final count would be exact facsimiles of the votes that were cast at least at the stage of voting. But there are a million other ways to cheat, going all the way to kind of not allowing parties to register or not allowing them to form or whatever. So I think, you know, we've created a technical solution to maybe one narrow problem, but there are surely margins for substitution into other types of nefarious activities. I think, though, the other point you raised, which is an important one and one that we try to be very conscious of, is kind of who would use the information and is the information at all actionable. I think that's sort of, on one level, it really becomes a technical question. It's also a political economy question. So there actually are a lot of bits of information that kind of mid-level or senior level policymakers would love to have. Kind of, they don't get direct kickbacks when a doctor takes a bribe for a simple injection. And in fact, there are political rents to them to being able to eliminate this. The bottleneck for them is that they just lack the information, or they lack actionable information to go out and to pursue that. So I think it really kind of is something that becomes highly contextual, and you have to identify in collaboration where is an innovation going to be helpful for you? What are the sorts of corruption you might actually be interested in going after? And I think that the revelation, at least through the work in Pakistan, has been that there's a lot of low-level corruption. I mean, it's not going to create kind of deep political change in Pakistan, but a lot of low-level corruption that they would be interested in a technical solution to help eliminate.
Okay. George, were one or two of those questions you want to pick up on?
There was a question about lessons learned in Afghanistan, and just to say, P4P as a corporate pilot is at its final stage, and basically our office in Rome is capturing all the data, and there is going to be a final evaluation, I think, at the beginning of 2014, which is going to provide insights of how different approaches in different countries are basically meeting this objective of helping people to increase their livelihoods. In Afghanistan itself, what I've seen in 6 months that I'm there, we are basically facing as basically what I mentioned here. We're facing a lot of problems which are coming from the environment, which is very insecure. We are having a lot of problems in access to the areas where we are basically implementing, and we can't go to every place where we would like to go. We can't go physically, and we cannot even send the monitors which are hired by us and which are not WFP staff because of the access problem. And this is where the information technology kicks in, because in some of the areas we are now trying to implement IT-based monitoring system which is using the smartphones in order to basically ensure that the monitors which are reporting within the area, which means that they visited, and there is going to be a system which actually feeds into the database directly by utilizing certain softwares inside of the smartphones, which sounds great. At the same time, this also represents a problem in Afghanistan, because some of the areas, people who are going to do monitoring, they cannot have anything which connects them to the international organization. Otherwise, it makes life for them very unsafe. So they are basically not taking even their own mobile phones, because otherwise someone may see an international foreign name inside of the phone, which is going to be very dangerous for a person, and people are going without anything, just actually observing and reporting. So I would like to reiterate what is my let's say finding within the 6 months, and I by that do not pretend to know what is going on. I mean, for Afghanistan and for any other place, if person wants to know it well, needs to spend a lot of time outside, because we are talking about different culture. We are talking about interpretation and filtering information that they received in a very specific way, which is strange for us. That is the bottom line of anyone who has lived a long time outside of his own country. How basically something that is being said, it takes, I don't know, it's a politically correct word, but I think there is a game in English, it's called Chinese whisper. which goes, what we say, it takes a long time until I hear what actually people think that I said. And this is really critical for anyone who wants to pass on any message or develop capacity at the field level with small-scale people. Because, for example, in Afghanistan or in Congo, in many other places, these people are completely illiterate. And the only connection to what they understand of, let's say, trade or whatever, what the Western society has in mind, is through interpretations given from not always very friendly people. So it takes a lot of time to actually put together and utilize what is their traditional way in showing what is it that we want to achieve. And that is probably the great part of lessons learned, utilizing what people already do in order to present them that this, what they do, is not bad, because, by the way, they survived something that none of us would. And we're utilizing, I'm utilizing this to show them that there is maybe a different way, which is mandatory if they would like ever to come working in a structured environment, which we want to achieve.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if I answered.
Yeah. Yeah. There'll be a coffee break shortly,
yeah.
and maybe we'll pick up some of the additional feedback then. Sean, would you like to make some final remarks?
Definitely, I want to thank Steve. We'd really benefit from that report. Just a final small comment. The point of this intervention is not this large-scale thing, and we take everything that you're saying. It's the point is to have the regime, which is repressive, to understand that they don't lose any power by being a little less repressive. That's the only margin of calculation. This is the Chinese calculation. That's the way they started, and then they're saying we still control everything, but we don't have to be as repressive. That's the kind of the experiment, and there is no overthrowing of regime. I don't think Ed will quite like that. Right. But I think the ICT idea is a really good idea, where we can get away with small changes.
All right. Thank you. Well, it's been a really rich discussion here. And as I said, coffee is coming up, and so I'm sure if you have more questions, you'll be able to come back to the three presenters here. I want to thank them for very good presentations. I think it provoked a lot of conversation. I kind of have three general areas that I thought were talked about. And ICT, of course, would be one of those. And I might be a little bit more ambitious, I guess, in answering Joe's question than you were. I do think there's potential for ICTs to be transformative. It's mobilizing information. You've focused a lot on that. But it's also providing transparency to processes that in the past weren't always that transparent, and as a consequence, increasing trust. So I think a lot of those themes that we talked about today, ICTs have the potential for contributing to. The trade and development, it would be the second area. And, you know, I think we've tried to answer a lot of problems. Why, for instance, innovations aren't being adopted as rapidly. The uptake is so slow. But I think at the same time, we realize that over the long term, commerce is essential for the kinds of changes that we expect. And an ability and a capacity to secure livelihoods is one way of reducing the stressors leading to conflict. So trade and development, certainly an important part of it as well. That's in a way linked to the third theme I have, that's longer term strategies. And perhaps because of my current focus on resilience, you know, this notion that we've got to combine efforts that are dealing with today's problems with efforts that we know are going to be essential for contributing to resolutions to ongoing, persistent problems. And so I think that resilience theme that I didn't hear quite as much as I would have liked to, I guess, is one that I would encourage you to look at as a way of combining these various things. The last point was the indicator, conflict indicator for FTF. I will say again on resilience that the resilience programs are working in areas that are less favored, where there is much more conflict than you might find in some of the higher potential areas where commerce is stronger. All right, so with those closing remarks,
If I can have just something.
Please.
Maybe which is interesting. We are going to have a mid-term review of P4P, which is going to help us to determine what to do in future and how to link with this operation PRO, Protracted Relief Operation, which is being developed for 2014-2016. And somewhere in July and August, there is going to be a possibility to actually look into how to develop a project or a program which is going to be more development-based in correlation with PRO. And therefore, that is maybe interesting for people who would like maybe to be part of it. We are going to invite, and there might be an opening for kind of a research and program writing in this respect, which is kind of a thrilling experience for maybe students or graduate students or even higher level.
Very good. One last thing. There are people who are participating via the internet, and I am to remind you that within about a minute you are to refresh the current page that you're on. And so when we start up after coffee break, which is 11 o'clock, is that when we get back? Then you'll be set to go. And I've got the website here. Is that important to give them as well? If there are, all right. ConDevCenter.org/workshop. So that will link you back into the second session of the morning, correct? That's right. All right. Thank you very much.